Today we're in 1 Samuel chapter 5, starting in verse 1. We're going to go all the way to chapter 7, verse 2. And the title I've given this one comes right out of the text right near the end of chapter 6. And the question it asks is, who can stand in the presence of God? Last week, Tyler took us through 1 Samuel chapter 4, where Israel in their battles with the Philistines employed the Ark of God, using it basically as a talisman or a good luck charm. This, of course, failed. And in the wake of this, Eli dies, and his daughter-in-law, as she was dying, named her newborn son Ichabod, meaning without glory, or the glory has departed. But before we get into this idea of the presence of God, I'd like you to go to a table talk. And the first question we have today is this: what do you think of when you hear the phrase, the presence of God? Okay, I hope that had some interest and bared some fruit as you discussed that. But when you think about to last week's text in chapter 4, the first principle that we get out of this text, including last week, about the presence of God is, number one, the presence of God cannot be manipulated. And of course, Israel, in their at that particular time in their history, they saw the ark obviously as something that would bring them a charm or good luck in the battle of the Philistines. And of course that's not the way that God works. But now we move to chapter 5 and we continue this story of Israel, of what happens, because last week the Philistines had captured the ark. And so let's pick it up in chapter 5 verse 1. After the Philistines had captured the ark of God, they took it from Ebenezer to Ashdod. Then they carried the ark into Dagon's temple and set it beside Dagon. When the people of Ashdod rose early the next day, there was Dagon fallen on his face on the ground before the ark of the Lord. They took Dagon and put him back in his place. But the following morning when they rose, there was Dagon fallen on his face on the ground before the ark of the Lord. His head and hands had been broken off and were lying on the threshold. Only his body remained. That is why to this day neither the priests of Dagon nor any others who enter Dagon's temple at Ashdod step on the threshold. So when the Philistines capture the ark, they place the ark in the temple of their idol, Dagon, probably to demonstrate the power of Dagon over Israel's God. However, the Philistines find their idol, Dagon, fallen over twice, the second time with its head and hands broken off and lying on the threshold of the temple. This demonstrated God's sovereign power as well as judgment. The extremities of the idol being chopped off, the hands and the head being chopped off, in those cultures often represented a form of a punishment for a crime. So the Philistines, rather than recognizing the sovereign power of God, the devotees or the priests to Dagon were very committed to their idolatrous ways, and they ascribe mystical power to the threshold of the temple where they found the head and the hands of Dagon. Of course, we know this is not the proper response to the sovereign power of Almighty God. As they try to recognize what is sacred or holy, first of all, their mindset is to have an idol, Dagon. When that is not working out well and they see this kind of mystical thing going on in their temple, then they ascribe holiness to the threshold, to the place where they found the head and the hands of Dagon. And so they're connecting divinity or sacredness with objects and location. And so the number 2 principle about God's presence is that God's presence cannot be contained or limited by objects or location. We see this reflected in the Apostle Paul's remarks on Mars Hill in Athens, up in the book of Acts in chapter 17, when he's speaking to the philosophers and the religious people up there. And he says, "The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth, and does not live in temples built by human hands." We carry on in the text. The Lord's hand, in verse 6, was heavy on the people of Ashdod and in its vicinity. He brought devastation on them and afflicted them with tumors. When the people of Ashdod saw what was happening, they said, "The ark of the God of Israel must not stay here with us, because his hand is heavy on us, and Dagon our God." So they called together all the rulers of the Philistines and asked them, "What shall we do with the ark of the God of Israel?" They answered, "Have the ark of the God of Israel moved to Gath." So they moved the ark of the God of Israel. But after they had moved it, the Lord's hand was against that city, throwing it into a great panic. He afflicted the people of the city, both young and old, with an outbreak of tumors. So they sent the ark of God to Ekron. As the ark of God was entering Ekron, the people of Ekron cried out, "They have brought the ark of the God of Israel around to us to kill us and our people." So they called together all the rulers of the Philistines and said, "Send the ark of the God of Israel away. Let it go back to its own place, or it will kill us and our people." For death had filled the city with panic. God's hand was very heavy on it. Those who did not die were afflicted with tumors, and the outcry of the city went up to heaven. So not only did God's presence destroy their idol, Dagon, but the people themselves were afflicted with tumors as a result of God's heavy hand. The solution for the people of Ashdod was to move the ark to Gath. Then the people of Gath sent it on to Ekron. But wherever they sent it, the result was the same. So, bringing together the rulers, and there was 5 rulers of the Philistines, the solution then was to send the ark back to Israel. So this is principle number 3 about the presence of God. And that is, the presence of God cannot be controlled. The presence of God cannot be controlled. So let's just review the first 3. The presence of God cannot be manipulated. The presence of God cannot be contained or limited by objects or location. The presence of God cannot be controlled. So I want to go to a table talk as we're thinking about these principles. Do you think Christians today try to manipulate, control, or possess the power of God's presence? Do you think Christians try to do that today? And what might that look like? So take a few minutes and we'll be back in a second. Let's pick up the story in chapter 6 of 1 Samuel. Starting in verse 1, when the ark of the Lord had been in Philistine territory 7 months, the Philistines called for the priests and the diviners and said, "What shall we do with the ark of the Lord? Tell us how we should send it back to its place." And they answered, "If you return the ark of the God of Israel, do not send it back to him without a gift. By all means, send a guilt offering to him. Then you will be healed, and you will know why his hand has not been lifted from you." The Philistines asked, "What guilt offering should we send to him?" They replied, 5 gold tumors and 5 gold rats, according to the number of the Philistine rulers. because the same plague has struck both you and your rulers. Make models of the tumors and of the rats that are destroying the country, and give glory to Israel's God. Perhaps he will lift his hand from you and your God and your land. Why do you harden your hearts as the Egyptians and Pharaoh did? When Israel's God dealt harshly with them, did they not send the Israelites out so they could go on their way? Now then, get a new cart ready with 2 cows that have calved and have never been yoked. Hitch the cows to the cart, but take their calves away and pen them up. Take the ark of the Lord and put it on the cart. And in a chest beside it, put the gold objects you are sending back to him as a guilt offering. Send it on its way, but keep watching it. If it goes up to its own territory toward Beth Shemesh, then the Lord has brought this great disaster on us. But if it does not, then we will know that it was not his hand that struck us, but that it happened to us by chance. So they did this. They took 2 such cows and hitched them to the cart and penned up their calves. They placed the ark of the Lord on the cart, and along with it the chest containing the gold rats and the models of the tumors. Then the cows went straight up toward Beth Shemesh, keeping on the road and lowing all the way. They did not turn to the right or to the left. The rulers of the Philistines followed them as far as the border of Beth Shemesh. So, the Philistine authorities, on spiritual matters that is, determined to return the ark to Israel according to a specific criteria. They prepared a guilt offering of 5 gold replicas of the tumors, as well as 5 gold rats, representing the plague that was destroying the Philistines, to send, and they were to send along with the ark. There was 1 tumor and 1 rat for each of the Philistine rulers or territories. And their thought was this: perhaps if we do this, he will lift his hand from you and your gods and your land. That's what they were hoping for. If we go through this act, maybe God will take his presence from us. Maybe he will halt this plague and what has come on us. The method of transportation, however, was designed to test and see if it was truly Israel's God that was inflicting them, or was it just a coincidence? They hitched a cart to 2 cows who were new mums. They then penned up the newborn cows so they could not follow their mums. If the cows proceeded to pull the cart to Beth Shemesh in Israeli territory and not return to their calves, then the Philistines would know for sure that all the problems were being caused by Israel's God. However, if the cows just returned to their calves, then the inflictions were a matter of chance. Therefore, they don't need to give up the ark. So you can kind of see the wager that's going on here. Let's take these cows and that are new mums, and so what they're going to want to do is go back to their calves. But if we hook them up to the cart with the ark and with our offering of golden tumors and rats, and they then go directly to Beth Shemesh, then what we have is proof that this was the God of Israel. But they wanted to kind of leave that chance, because if the cows, if they return to their cows, they go, oh, it was just a coincidence, so we can hang on to the ark. That's the only reason that they would want to do this. So the cows, though, and it sounded like they were complaining, they pulled the cart directly to Beth Shemesh, not turning to the left or the right. They made a lot of noise, but they went straight to Shemesh. And here's principle number 4 about the presence of God. The presence of God cannot be possessed. Let's go to verse 13 now and continue. Now the people of Beth Shemesh were harvesting their wheat in the valley, and when they looked up and saw the ark, they rejoiced at the sight. The cart came to the field of Joshua of Beth Shemesh, and there it stopped beside a large rock. The people chopped up the wood of the cart and sacrificed the cows as a burnt offering to the Lord. The Levites took down the ark of the Lord together with the chest containing the gold objects, placed them on the large rock. On that day, the people of Beth Shemesh offered burnt offerings and made sacrifices to the Lord. The 5 rulers of the Philistines saw all this, and then returned that same day to Ekron. These are the gold tumors the Philistines sent as a guilt offering to the Lord, 1 each for Ashdod, Gaza, Ashkelon, Gath, and Ekron. And the number of the gold rats was according to the number of Philistine towns belonging to the 5 rulers, the fortified towns with their country villages. The large rock on which the Levites set the ark of the Lord is a witness to this day, in the field of Joshua of Beth Shemesh. But God struck down some of the inhabitants of Beth Shemesh, putting 70 of them to death because they looked into the ark of the Lord. The people mourned because of the heavy blow the Lord had dealt them. And the people of Beth Shemesh asked, "Who can stand in the presence of the Lord, this holy God? To whom will the ark go up from here?" Then they sent messengers to the people of Kiriath Jearim, saying, "The Philistines have returned the ark of the Lord. Come down and take it up to your own town." So, upon receiving the ark, and the ark arriving at Beth Shemesh, the people there were initially excited at seeing the return of the ark. The ark of the Lord has returned. And they celebrated by chopping up the cart and burning it and offering cows as a burnt offering to the Lord. So all seemed to be well for the moment anyway. The Philistine rulers who were observing all this, they returned that same day to Ekron, presumably to their old ways of life. They had witnessed something of the power of God, but remained stuck in their old ways. They were afraid of the power of God, but all they wanted to do was get rid of the presence of the Lord and go back to their idols and their old ways. The joy of the people of Beth Shemesh was short-lived because some of them decided to peer into the ark. And this resulted, as recorded here, in 70 deaths. This was because those who looked into the ark had not gone through the process of consecration before the Lord. And we're going to come back to that idea of consecration in just a second. The solution for those at Beth Shemesh was the same as that of the Philistines. Send the ark somewhere else. The key question they ask, and it's the correct question, they just didn't answer the question. But the key question they ask in verse 20, who can stand in the presence of the Lord, this holy God? Instead of answering the question, their solution was just to send the ark along over to Kiriath Jearim. And part of the answer to the question will be found in the people of Kiriath Jearim. So starting in chapter 7, verse 1, "So the men of Kiriath Jearim came and took up the ark of the Lord. They brought it to Abinadab's house on the hill and consecrated Eleazar, his son, to guard the ark of the Lord. The ark remained at Kiriath Jearim a long time, 20 years in all. Then all the people of Israel turned back to the Lord." Eleazar is a common Levitical name. So it appears that Abinadab, the house of Abinadab, they're part of the Levitical race or Levitical tribe. In this case, he went through the proper process of consecration to be able to serve in the presence of the Lord. Again, and this is a theme through Judges and this early part of 1 Samuel. Again, we see that in a confusing time, that there are those who are paying attention to the ways of God. And apparently, Abinadab's house, and particularly in regards to Eleazar, they go through the prescribed ritual or the prescribed process of consecration to be able to serve God. And then we also see this verse in this section of verse 2 of chapter 7 that we'll carry on next week, but that the people of all Israel began to turn back or to seek the Lord. And so this whole episode begins as kind of a bit of a turning point in the affairs of Israel. And right in the middle of that is this idea of consecration of Eleazar. Consecration simply means to set apart for service and worship. To set your life apart, to dedicate it to the service and worship of the Lord. So when we gave our lives to Jesus by repenting for our sinfulness, we were set apart. And our purpose now is found in God's purpose. 1 Peter 2:9 says, "But you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness and into his wonderful light." So because of the work of Christ, we are forgiven, justified, and found to be blameless before God. And in that state, we do not have to hide from his presence. And by his Spirit, we walk in his presence every day. This is the remarkable thing about the work of Christ in our life. The psalmist in Psalm 15 asked, well, basically the same question that the people of Beth Shemesh asked. When the people in Beth Shemesh asked, who can stand in the presence of the Lord? The psalmist says, "Lord, who may dwell in your sacred tent?" If you look at Psalm 15. "Lord, who may dwell in your sacred tent? Who may live on your holy mountain?" And he answers the question. He says, "The one whose walk is blameless, who does what is righteous, who speaks the truth from the heart, whose tongue utters no slander, who does no wrong to a neighbor and casts no slur on others, who despises a vile person but honors those who fear the Lord, who keeps an oath even when it hurts and does not change their mind, who lends money to the poor without interest, who does not accept a bribe against the innocent. Whoever does these things will never be shaken." So who can stand in the presence of God? And it is those who have been consecrated, those who can serve the Lord and have been set apart and are found to be blameless, a holy priesthood before the Lord. And as believers, we have that ability, that privilege to be in the presence of the Lord. But just as a short review, these principles about the power of God and the presence of God are important. The presence of God cannot be manipulated. The presence of God cannot be limited by objects or location. The presence of God cannot be controlled. And the presence of God cannot be possessed. And then we look at this whole story of how those who were so afraid of the presence of God and those who just misunderstood, they were living lives that were rooted in idolatry. And they tried to do these things. They tried to manipulate God. They tried to control and possess and tried to locate God. But you can't do that. But you can stand in God's presence. And you can worship and you can praise and you can align your life to his purpose. So I want today to end our time with the table talk with that question. Who can stand in the presence of God? And take time to pray and thank God for the work of Christ that allows you to know his presence.